Okay, so you've just participated in the Amistad Conference. Can you just tell us a little bit about why you participated and what message you wanted to get out?
I think for me, Africana Studies has been such an important part of my own intellectual journey, and it's given me a lot of the tools that I use to engage in a scholarship that I'm currently involved in. And so for me, it was important to kind of help be a part of the effort that is that is designed to broaden the scope and the reach of the discipline, and bring it into the educational system in a more cohesive and holistic way. And so it's really, for me, it's important. Africana has something to offer the world that is unique and that is useful, and so I want to be able to be a part of the efforts that expands the reach of those tools.
One of the reasons I even started in Africana was to help give me a framework in which to look at the world and look at the way in which the world is structured. I think it's important now that we move from a space of it kind of being something that's just out there to something that's institutionalized, especially in primary and secondary school education. From my own personal experience, my explorations of the Black diaspora have always been outside of the school. To be sure, I had professors that introduced it, but it was never a core part of my education. Through my church, through student organizations, I participated in those things, but in terms of an institutional space in primary and secondary education, it wasn't there. In college, to be sure, it's here, and it is very much a part of my own academic work, in that the things that I study are useful to shaping policy and public policy. I think one of the things that Africana is most it can help out in doing is help you recognize how power is exerted over groups of people and how to change that. Because to be sure, a scholar said this a long time ago, that if you solve the issues or if you're able to address the problems of Black people, you can address the problems for all peoples. And I think studying and looking at it from the Black perspective, the Africana perspective, and looking at how power is exerted over people, whether they're in Africa, whether they're in the Caribbean or the United States, helps us better understand exploitation, the ways in which capitalism is, interesting as a system it is, how at times it does create a system of need and want that underprivileges some while privileging the others and doesn't allow for total growth. And I think in a lot of ways it can help us, the conversations that we engage now in terms of education, testing, while those are necessary conversations, I think the larger conversations need to look at the entire system. And I think Africana gives the tools that are necessary. Because it's interdisciplinary, it gives you the tools that are necessary to really deconstruct those things and get into some of the real answers that can address some of our societal problems.
Okay. So for Amistad, where do you see Amistad going? What was your workshop covering that was so important in this process?
One of the things that was that in our workshop, we wanted to kind of get a sense of what Africana, what attracts us to Africana in the first place, what Africana has to offer, thinking about a definition of what Africana Studies is, and looking in some ways towards the future. An assessment of kind of where we are and kind of where we want to be with the discipline, right? What can Africana potentially do, right? And because I think that one of the misfortunes, right, is that right now we currently look at it as a very marginalized type discipline. It's very specialized. It only serves us for these particular purposes. But I think that we need to begin to think more creatively about what all of the possibilities of Africana are, how knowledge generated in this field can influence not just history, right? Not just politics, not just whatever, but medicine and social sciences and criminal justice and all of these different fields where this knowledge will be useful. So I think one of the things that we were trying to do is to kind of look back and then look forward in terms of where we've been and where we'd like the discipline to go.
And what got you into Africana? You were involved in the community cultural center for many years, and what got you back into the academic stream?
I think for me, my journey with Africana would certainly go back to my own childhood, where my own experiences in elementary school even were kind of that I had teachers that at that point in my life actually were very proactive in making sure the students had a sense of the importance of Black history and the place that it played in the world, right? And so for me, it was, it was kind of something that I was able to get early on in terms of like how I'm supposed to move through the world and how I'm supposed to move through the world of knowledge, right? When I got to high school, I had my own experiences with trying to advocate for with students that were in my high school for getting Black studies into our curriculum and things like that. And so we were successful at doing that. And so when I got to college, there was a disciplinary space for me to kind of explore this further. So for personal reasons, right, Africana helped me to develop a more complete sense of myself and people who look like me, right, and what we've done in the world and what we're capable of doing in the world. And then it continues, right? I use it in all of the tools that I've gleaned from studying Africana. I use all of those tools to think about all of the different areas that I work in, right? My community work, but also my scholarship in other disciplinary fields. I'm currently in an anthropology program, and I use all of the things I learned in Africana to do the work that I do now. It teaches me how to ask certain questions. It teaches me how to look in certain spaces where I might not have thought to look if I didn't have the experience that I gained from being in an Africana Studies department. How to ask questions, how to look beyond the questions that are already out there to ask different ones, to ask the questions that are not being asked, to look at issues that are not necessarily being addressed, to look for those gaps, right? And to think about how they might more productively be filled with other types of knowledge.
John, you have been involved teaching in both the K to high school as well as the college setting. Coming to the Amistad Conference with that background, what sort of mentoring do you see as being needed for students across those different levels?
I think one of the major things is there needs to be a push or shining light on the local history. I think a lot of the high school curriculum forces get students to look at these larger structures. What is the United States government? We have 3 branches of government. We have the larger history of the United States, but it never really allows them to say, well, what's going on in my immediate environment? Who is my mayor? Who is my representative? Who is my council person? And why are they important in this system? If there's something that I need, I can go to them, but they don't get that information. They're basically taught about everything else around them, but the immediate isn't necessarily focused on it, especially in the place in which I've taught, Patterson and in Newark. The local is typically not looked highly upon, and local history is not considered. But if you peel back the layers and you look at the larger scope of Newark history, Patterson, even in Brunswick, you find a lot of interesting things. I mean, one of the first things is that all groups of people have gone through a transitionary period through the ghetto, so to speak. But what becomes more interesting is that people of color have kind of been ensconced in that space, and to be sure they have gotten out of it, but in a lot of places, and I think New Jersey is a very clear example of it, even my hometown of Essex County, Newark is predominantly Black, and the surrounding towns are predominantly Black. But those areas are contiguous to one another, and that's not by accident. And so I think one of the things that we can do in terms of mentoring young people is to help them recognize those things around them, that the reason why things in their community may not be on par with things in more affluent communities, not because they're not smart enough, it's not because their schools are poor, their schools are failing, but there are certain things that have been taking place for years now. I mean, it's interesting, in Newark schools, there's a big hubbub about the closing down of schools and the privatization of schools, but Newark schools have been in shambles since really the 1940s and 1950s. Way back in the 1920s, there were city fathers, many of whom did not live in the city, who were making decisions about policy and budgets for their own businesses, but at the expense of people in the city. Now, again, that's local history, but that's not that's in the curriculum. And when you start looking at those things, that's tied into the growth of capitalism in the United States. That's tied into the growth of that's tied into the Industrial Revolution in the United States. That's tied into the expansion of markets and the shifting from the industrial to the post-industrial economy. All these things are tied together, but the local is lost in that. And so I think one of the key things to do is to get students to look at what is immediately around them and give them the tools of being able to assess those things. And then from there, I think that starts to cultivate a different sense of not only self, but a way of looking at the larger world in which they live in. And then you can have students really becoming more engaged in what do I want to do after high school. It's not just a matter of I'm going to college. Well, no, there's a purpose behind going to college. Because I think, again, it's like one of those things, life has become so regimented and these are the patterns that we must follow. I mean, in general, schools have become these institutions in and of themselves to maintain themselves without a purpose. It's not just a matter of going to school to get an education, get a job, but what is your job going to do? And especially when your community is underserved, well, can you go back and provide service for that community? You can come here and major in Africana Studies, and you can also major in biology, and they both complement one another in a lot of ways. But I think you can't get to that phase until you actually start when they're young. I mean, all the studies are pretty much showing that once the student gets to third and fourth grade, and if they're not given that foundation, they tend to drift and to lose sight of the larger picture of why education is important. It's not to say that you can have changes, but I think in a lot of the poor and urban communities, the dangers of not getting them early enough are readily apparent. And so I think at an early age, the mentorship has to be, like, they have to learn how to love self. I mean, your first teachers are your parents. And so really your history should start with your own families, not George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. But no, what is it to be who you are? And why is that important? And how does that fit within a larger narrative? And I think once you start there, then you'll start to see not only better educational outcomes for students, but then we start to integrate African American history into the curriculum because they are part of that curriculum.
A final word from you about what do you take away from today's conference?
I mean, I think it's wonderful to see people from so many different parts of the state, from so many different fields, kind of coming together to think about a problem that, in a lot of ways, has been an ongoing challenge. It maybe even in some respects can be considered kind of intractable, and to come together from a variety of different fields to think about the different types of solutions that we need to begin thinking about in order to make this a reality. Because we, Africana Studies programs have been around for 40 plus years now, right? And for a lot of us, I mean, that was a victory, right? To have these departments established. Now that they've evolved, they're kind of a part of many campuses. They're also under siege, right, from university administrators. But also, I think we haven't quite figured out how to take them to the next level, right? And I think this is a critical time for the discipline where we need to begin. We need to think about how to move this thing forward, right? Because those departments were established, as was noted in the panel, through activism and through struggles, right? And so how do we move on from that, right? Because a lot of how we think about history, right? We think about, moments like, the civil rights and the Black Power era, and we think about, they've achieved some type of victory, but we don't think about this as kind of an ongoing thing that we have to pick up the baton, right, and move it forward to, for the next people to pick up, as opposed to something that's done and finished, right? And we just have to sit back and reap the benefits of it. But that's not where we are. We need to be able to kind of continue to do work, continue to improve, continue to expand, continue to evolve the field and to do what we can to make it benefit the most amount of people. So I think for me, that was kind of the takeaway from today's conference is thinking about, we understand what the problem is and we understand what the problem has been. Now let's actually come together and figure out ways to move it forward from where it's been sitting for so long, right? And so that would be, I think, my takeaway from this conference, and I hope that we're able to achieve that to some degree.
John?
I think the major one is that I think when you bring minds together, people of a collective mind together, you can achieve a lot of great things. The simple fact that you have, and I think bringing people from not only different fields of expertise, but I mean, truth be told, there is, I think, a schism between the academy and primary and secondary school teachers. Anecdotally, the idea that now that I have my PhD, the fact that I would consider being a high school teacher is offensive to some people who have PhDs because they never wouldn't have to think about it. But my question is, why is that such a bad thing, especially the expertise that I can bring to that particular field, that I can train high school students, even elementary school students, to start thinking about things in ways that they're more than capable of, and equipping them so by the time they get to the higher levels, they'll be more than ready to tackle whatever things they may encounter. I think it's something that we need to start considering. And I think the one takeaway is that in order to address a lot of these issues that we deal with in society, and the need for a better understanding of the Black experience in America is one of them. You have to bring people from all levels and all fields and all levels of expertise into the conversation, because without that, I mean, we're just kind of doing our thing. We're reinforcing our security, but it's not really helping the larger, we're not helping students. If we're not bringing our expertise to primary and secondary students, how do we expect them then to be well prepared to actually be able to matriculate? I think one of the things that will be interesting is that when this initiative actually really kicks in and we start to see certain changes in the curriculum, is there a possibility for the level of academics to increase as well? Not only in suburban schools, but also in urban schools. Can we use some very creative ways of getting at issues of literacy to improve student performance, so when they get to the colleges, they don't have to take the remedial courses anymore? That adds another year to their college careers, which also adds another year of expenses to their college careers. I think these are like holistic ways of looking at the problems, but it makes our jobs a lot easier as educators on the college level, because we have students that are ready to get in there and start working, but at the same time, students are better prepared and are helped out because they can move through their academic tracks a lot easier. So I think bringing like minds together and really working together with different people is the big thing I take away from this.
Okay, so to wrap up, can you name yourselves for our audience? Who are you?
My name is John Johnson Jr.
I'm Donna Austin.
Thank you.